Today, the topic is overriding, and I'm going to talk about how overriding leads to burnout. But I'm going to spend most of my time just like explaining what are all the ways in which we're overriding, because this is really subconscious. Like, we're doing this automatically. This is a pattern that was set up a long time ago, and so when you hear the word overriding, you might think of it only maybe in one aspect. You might think like, oh, well, I'm not really overriding that much in my daily life. I probably work too much, or, maybe these are obvious ways, or, maybe I did that workout at the gym or did a class and then did another workout, and maybe that was too much and I was overriding there. But this is really sneaky. This shows up all the time relationally. We can really see how this starts to show itself in communication, right? And in our own sort of indecisiveness, I feel like it shows up, right? So let me start here, right? What is overriding? I have some notes here in front of me, so hopefully you don't mind that I'm looking down. So, and this is my definition, right? Overriding, anytime we sacrifice authenticity for attachment, for safety, even though it might not be actual, like authentic safety, it could be just familiar safety, right? So that's why I put it kind of in quotes, for safety, for production, or to prove worth or value. So then it goes back to this question of like, well, what's authentic? What does that even mean? Most of us adults don't know actually how we authentically feel about a lot of things. Until we start doing this work and we realize wow, I'm always kind of looking to somebody else to make a decision for me, or asking someone else's opinion about a certain thing, or, just not having real decisive clarity on a lot of things. And again, I'm just pointing out this shows up in these little ways throughout our day. And so how does this start, right? So we'll go into sort of the earlier childhood development parts of this pattern of overriding. So we'll go back to what Gabor Mate always says, and I have quoted him many times because it's a beautiful, well-explained quote. A child will always sacrifice authenticity for attachment. I do believe that's exactly what he said, actually. And so that's survival. So when we're little, it is not, and it's not safe for us to voice our own opinions, for us to have big emotions, for us to have maybe even an opinion at all in our home, right? If we got in trouble or got punished for acting out, right? If we didn't ever receive, we received a lot of praise when we were good, when we were quiet, all of these things. So what we do is we start to sort of perform, and we start to sort of act the way that our parents want us to, all of the ways in which we receive praise, or all of the ways in which we control our environment and make our environment stay calm, stay okay, make mom and dad be not mad, make them be happy. We start to almost try to manipulate that environment like that as a means of protection. It makes total sense that we would do this, right? It's actually really, really intelligent, and it's automatic. I mean, this is a very primal, this is a survival-based pattern, but it's very organically wired into our system to do this, because survival is that primal need to stay attached to our caregivers is the most important thing, because they're the ones that are keeping a roof over our head, and they're the ones that are feeding us every day. So most adults don't know what their true authentic, I don't want to say most. Maybe I'll say most. Really a lot of adults even do not know what their true authenticity is because they've been in this place of needing to be accepted for so long, right? This pattern was set up early on. They knew they had to be a certain way, and that just carries on into adulthood. So there's an automatic sacrifice of the self. Well, what do you want? Well, how do you feel? What do you need? What do you think we should do? What do you think I should do? There's a constant, I mean, that's just a few examples of like how this shows up as an adult relationship. Obviously, it can get into productivity and how we work out, how we live our days, just in all of our relationships, but also just how we function, how we socialize, how often we socialize, how often we show up at events and things like that, where we feel like there's an expectation to be there and all these things, and we don't really want to go, right? That's overriding. But so this is very automatic. It's not something that we think, oh man, until we start really doing this work and started really observing and becoming really aware, most of us are just, this is an automatic, organic thing we're doing constantly as survival, functional freeze beings in the world to survive. And one way that I'm really noticing this in myself and in some of my, peers, and just again relationally, is how much we're trying to accommodate another person. Again, when we become aware of this, it becomes this process of pausing, right? When we're in survival, there's urgency to constantly be like, there's urgency really for that attachment. So it's a quick, if it's survival based, it's like, let me accommodate you first before you have a chance to like reject me or, abandon me in some way, right? When some of that heals, our fear of being rejected, our fear of being cast out, our fear of being abandoned, our fear of betrayal even too, more in this sense, rejection and abandonment. When some of that gets healed, we can actually take space and pause, whether it's relationally or any time where we're kind of in this pattern. Once we start to heal, it's like, actually, I can take a couple of days before I make this decision or before I respond to this person, because I really want to think about like how I really feel about this, and this is kind of starts this process of not overriding, right? Because we're like, oh, I need to take time and think about how I feel. And a lot of times when we're in this process of healing this part, we aren't sure. We kind of just have to make a judgment call. It's like, I'm not really sure how I feel. I could go this way. I could go that way. Like, I don't know. And like, that's okay, right? I would say if we're pausing and we're reflecting, that's a great step, So we'll back up a little bit and I have a list of all of the ways in which overriding can show up in our lives. Okay, I've named a couple already, but I just want to go through and be clear. Okay, so the first one is, like I said before, in conversations, right? And this could be like conversations we don't actually even want to be in. It could be a confrontation that we aren't sure how we feel. And so we just adapt for the other person's needs, for that attachment, again, in this survival-based way. where we disagree with someone, but we don't say that, right? So that's overriding. It's like, oh, this person is saying how they feel and they have this strong opinion. And maybe our opinion is not that way. Maybe we have a different opinion, or we just don't know, but we agree with them anyway, because we can see maybe they're very passionate about this subject. And if I disagree, or if I even say, I'm not sure how I feel about this, that might feel like it's going to disrupt my attachment with this person. So I'm going to just agree with them because it makes it easier, right? That's overriding. The second one I have on my list is that we push through our day even when we're exhausted. So this one is maybe the most obvious one. We work 8 hours a day, maybe even 9 hours a day. And then, a colleague asks us to go to dinner or have a drink or something after work. And we feel like we can't say no because this person has asked us like 3 or 4 times. And even though we're tired, we do it anyway. Okay. 3, hard, intense workouts. Okay. Now, I am a huge proponent of working out and, having a healthy relationship with exercise, obviously, and movement, super important. But I'm noticing like some of these workout classes that are available, some of these cycling classes, particularly women with lifting weights. I'm noticing a lot of just possibly beyond authentic capacity, right? And so this often does show up as sort of an immediate burnout towards the end of the day. If the person crashes between 3 and 5, has to take a nap or whatever, that's an adrenal burnout. So that usually means you've been going too hard, too fast towards the beginning of the day. Again, we would put that more in a category of adrenal fatigue, but I mean, it is definitely, adrenal fatigue is burnout. And that might not show up exactly like that, but the question is, do we know what is our perfect amount of movement? Like, have we really internalized and thought about, what is it that my body really needs? How can I push myself? Like, where's my edge, and how do I determine that? Because I can tell you, if you do feel burnt out and exhausted a few hours after your workout, you've gone way over, right? So you've gone way past that edge. And so it's like, what does that look like? And maybe you don't have that exact symptom. Maybe you're young. You can do these types of workouts and not have that come up in your day, and you feel really good. You've got these endorphins going. You're like, yes, 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 yes. And you push through, and all these things feel great in your day, right? But then when you reach 45, all of a sudden, you're very tired. You can't do those workouts anymore. Your bones start to feel really sore, all these things. And that means you've been overriding for an extended period of time, usually. And so what I noticed when I started to really like clue in on what my body could actually do in terms of a workout, it's really not a lot, actually. I was a person who overrode because it made my body feel good in my 20s with marathon running, okay, and really pushing myself in workouts. And I was always having burnout. I was always having fatigue. Now, I was also taking Ritalin and Adderall and Dexedrine and these types of stimulant drugs to keep me going. So I was overriding anyway, and I had been overriding for years and years and years before, which is what led to that shutdown anyway, right? So that's a big clue. If you can't get through your day without some of these stimulant things, like definitely overriding. And by the way, like, it's okay, right? This is not about shame or anything. This is just about awareness. where you are, getting curious about some of these patterns, and seeing how we can titrate maybe a healthier pattern, so that what we want is not to be in burnout. You know what I mean? And we don't want to get to 45 and not be able to work out at all for years, because that's actually what I did. I stopped my workouts completely, and then it was like just a walk. And now I'm finally back doing some weight training twice a week, but working very, very, very mindfully and specifically with my trainer on what I can handle, what sends my cortisol too high, right? And another reason how I know if we do too much is if I don't sleep well that night, So we rarely get my heart pumping like in something cardiovascular. Really just the reps, the high reps, low weights, that is enough for my body to go into that, more rapid heartbeat and more adrenaline kind of going. And what happened this week actually is he goes, let's push your heartbeat up a little bit. So we did some jumps where I was touching a bar up, 10, three sets of 10, 2 sets of 10 actually. The last one he goes, let's just do 5 this time. And I thought to myself, ooh, am I overriding right now? And I noticed, and then sure enough, that night I couldn't sleep. So that told me that was too much, right? My cortisol got too high, and it showed up for me at night, disrupted sleep. This can also show up for sleep. It can show up where we go to sleep and then we wake up around 3 or 4 a.m. That's high cortisol. Doesn't always happen with a workout. It can happen in lots of different ways, but usually we're overriding authentic capacity in some way in our day, because we've got to keep that cortisol and adrenaline spiked up really, really high, because that's the only way we can function, and then it's affecting sleep. So that's definitely the typical signs of burnout. Okay. The next way in which we override is going to social engagements or events that we don't want to go to. This showed up a lot in my life. Sometimes it's okay. Like sometimes, again, this is where we have to find our authentic window. When is it okay for me to go, you know what, I'm going to push myself just a little and show up at this event. I feel like I need to get out of the house. When is that healthy? And when is it just too much override, too much push for our system? I've said this in other videos. I'll say it again. I stopped doing a lot of social events when I was really healing lupus, when I was really healing chronic fatigue and shutdown and burnout. And I knew my capacity couldn't handle it. And I'm just now, really learning what I can take on authentically, what feels really good and supportive, and what is too much. And it's really important awareness to have. Okay, 5. We have pain or we've hurt ourselves and we just keep moving forward. We don't take time with that, either injury or maybe we twisted our ankle. And, I got to get to work. I've got to pick up the kids. I've got to this. I've got to that, And all of those things might be true, but it's like at the end of the day, do we have 5 minutes to just sit down and be like, I need to put some ice on this? You know what I mean? Most of us do. And if we feel like we don't have 5 minutes to do that, that's really survival-based ways of being. I mentioned this one before, multiple cups of coffee or stimulants to keep us going through the day. So that's a big way we override. We're just keeping that cortisol and adrenaline spiked. And then, of course, that shows up. Burnout, like I mentioned before, sleep, either disturbed sleep at night, crashing between 3 and 5, in those types of ways. 7, being a parent and your child's emotions or feelings, life has to take a priority. So this is an example of where we kind of have to override. You know what I mean? So for the parents out there, just know that a lot of your time, a lot of your day, relationship, because we want our children to actually have an authentic sense of attachment and safety in our relationship, which means we have to override a little bit. We have to put to the side some of our own stuff to meet them in their needs when they need it, so that they don't learn this pattern of override, right? And I'll just say it now, the way in which we honor ourselves and honor them in these types of situations and in daily life is by taking time when you have it, when they might be away from you or once they've gone to sleep, and taking a minute, revisiting in your mind the ways in which you had a lot come up in a certain situation, a lot was happening, and you just had to keep kind of going for them, right? And just revisiting that, feeling what's going on, feeling what's going on in my heart. When I think back to this incident where, they were having a big emotion and I got really triggered and a lot of anger came up, but I kind of pushed it down. So I had to override that natural response, that natural impulse, those natural feelings that I was having to kind of really be there for them in that moment. And so can I revisit this situation and allow myself to kind of feel some of those things? There's really not a way that I have seen today anyway. Now I think our children are becoming more evolved. I don't think they're going to have all of these ways in which they have to kind of override once they're adults and their parents, because I think right now we're teaching them a different way. There's a lot of education and knowledge around these subjects, and so hopefully we're teaching a totally different pattern. But right now in today's world, I don't know that there's a way to be a parent and not override, so I want to validate everyone's experience as a parent and say, yeah, I mean, we're all kind of doing that. You know what I mean? Overriding isn't always bad. I mean, is it ever bad? It's just what we're doing, what we've learned, what our pattern is. And here we are having education and awareness around it. Okay, 8. I think I kind of mentioned this one before. You stay silent in a situation where you feel like you should have used your voice. Again, when there's an inner voice inside of us, that authentic part of us, it's like, this situation doesn't feel good. This environment doesn't feel good. I don't know what it is about this grocery store. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of like, right? Anything, anytime. And we're like, but I've got to do this, right? Again, maybe sometimes we actually really have to do that, right? There are times where survival has to take a precedence, right? And then there's other times where we're like, every single time I do this and it doesn't feel good, and then when I leave, I feel it, or something happens where I have this weird, fatigue or this weird dissociative thing, and I'm actually going to stop doing this, right? That's meeting our authenticity. And let me say, authenticity is like a whisper sometimes, a lot of times when we're first understanding what our authenticity even is. I mean, she can be really silent under all those survival patterns, Sometimes it's not a thought. Sometimes it's not an emotion. Sometimes it's just this really subtle shift in a sensation, right? It's like this, something feels off, right? And so technically, anytime that we are not listening to that, we're overriding. And also, there are times with which we might have to override, you know, and we want to always aim for, obviously, safety. Um, if that little whisper is telling you something that doesn't feel right, something feels off about this situation, and it's a matter of safety, yeah, we want to always listen to that, right? If it's a matter of like, I'm not going to be on time, if I make this stop, and I'm not going to be on time to pick up my kids, or I'm not going to be on time for da 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 da, that's very survival based, right? Because actually, at the end of the day, does it matter if we take 5 minutes to like figure something out, to sort something out, to do something, like, right? These are just the ways that they can show up in like daily life. So, so the question is, and I touched on this a little bit already, but is overriding necessary in today's society? So, relationally, no. I don't, most of the time, I'm going to say it's not necessary. Is it necessary to maintain attachment? Is it necessary for survival? Is it necessary for safety in terms of relation? Then, it might feel that way, but we always have a choice, right? We always have a choice to like not have that relationship. That might be more authentic. So relationally, I'm going to say it's not necessary. It just takes a lot of healing to get to the point where we go, yeah, this relationship is not in alignment with me anymore. I don't want to override how I feel in relation with this person, or there's not, like, and that happens a lot in our healing. So that's why I'm kind of mentioning it. And so we might get to a point where, yeah, we don't want to override anymore. And it's not necessary for us to override. Like in relationships, it might feel necessary because that attachment and abandonment thing is so strong for you. And so what's authentic for where you are right now might be like, oh yeah, I need a little more time in this relationship. And that might be somewhere, hey, I'm noticing this, I'm aware of it, and I'm going to choose to stay in this relationship right now because actually I feel like my body's not ready to make this big shift. That, I would say, is actually not overriding. That's saying I'm making this choice with a lot of awareness and intention, with the goal of eventually maybe leaving this relationship, but just knowing like I need time and more healing to get to that point, right? So that is not overriding. I would say that's really honoring your system, even though you're not choosing to like leave that situation immediately. In terms of producing, like when we override in our job or in our career or in our workouts, like I was mentioning before, I would say so in terms of producing, right, to make a living, to support ourselves, to support our kids, I would say yes, most of us at least for a certain period of time, have to choose a little bit of override, again, as parents, in order to survive in the way that things are in the world, the way that modern society has us. There's a little bit of overriding that's probably necessary for most of us. But I think what we're doing, especially, what I'm doing with my own life and in this conversation, is just growing more awareness around when am I doing this and what actually is authentic for me and what's my goal, where do I want to be? That doesn't mean it's not also survival, right? So again, like, we're making these decisions because, we got to survive. You know what I mean? Every time we go off that authenticity track, it's using more of our energy. Okay, so that's like the big takeaway, I think, from today's conversation, is just to realize every time you go off of that authenticity track, even if it's just in a conversation, that's requiring more energy from you than if you stayed on your authenticity track. Okay, that said, there are times where we might need more healing. We know what our authenticity track is, and we know we're slightly off of it, but we also know that it would be a big jump. It would be too much. It would sacrifice too much of our energy to make that move right now. And so we need to just know this is our goal, to be here on this authenticity track, and what are the steps in which I'm going to take some time and get there, right? Because jumping from one to another, cutting off a relationship, switching your job really suddenly, like, for a lot of people, that's way outside of capacity. That's actually going to jolt the system even more than staying in a little bit of override for a period of time for you to plan and heal and do all of these things, where authenticity actually feels like a relief. It feels like flow again, and it feels really nice, and that's not to say sometimes we don't push. So this is where it's just really individual. It's individual. Depends on your personality, your disposition, how much you can take on, knowing what your authentic capacity is, and then, meeting that. For some people, again, it's like, I need to take this slow. For other people, it's like, I'm going to make this jump, and I'm probably going to feel it for a minute, but that's what I got to do. It's time to just make the decision and start living in my authenticity again. Again, very individual, depending on the situation, depending on the person, and then within that person's psyche, each situation can be different, right? So with work, you might be like, yeah, man, I can take this jump. I'm ready to switch careers. I can do it. So you push a little bit and you get on that authenticity track, or closer to that authenticity track. But relationally, you're like, ooh, I need time. Especially if I'm making this big jump in my career, I can't make this big jump in my relationship or something like that's coming up around that. And so then it's like, okay, and that's okay, right? It's like, I have awareness, and that's what it's all about. So a person who is in functional freeze, like, if you saw, a few weeks ago, I did a live on functional freeze. I talk a lot about functional freeze. This is your Donald Trump. This is your person, high-level CEO, extreme sports athlete. These are big examples of functional freeze, but functional freeze can show up just in the average person as well. Again, overriding constantly for that job, needing to produce, needing to meet others' expectations, and where we are always functioning from a place of needing to prove our worth and our value, right? Rather than from a place of real authenticity. A person who is in high level of functional freeze, which is a high level, lot of sympathetic energy that is being driven by the need to prove yourself. This person might not ever burn out, you guys. Now, will they show up later down the road? Maybe a heart issue, maybe fibromyalgia, maybe pain. Who knows? Eventually it shows up in the body, okay? This person can override a lot. They're overriding in their daily life. They're overriding for years and years and years. The need to prove themselves keeps them going. I have to be the best. I have to be amazing. Otherwise, I'm going to die, right? I mean, that is the functional freeze pattern. And it can take 60 years to show up in the body. You know what I mean? For these people. And it might not ever show up as this obvious like burnout type of symptom, which I think of as fatigue, right? That's the basis of burnout is fatigue, but it can show up in other ways, in other symptomology. And I believe it does, right? Or it shows up in personality stuff, narcissism, these types of things. For most people, overriding is gonna lead to burnout eventually, right? Unless they have this high functional freeze pattern, and then of course it might not. But I will say someone in functional freeze doesn't always get burnout. But someone who has burnout has definitely been overriding most of their life. So it doesn't always work in reverse both ways, right? So if you're overriding, it won't always lead to burnout. But if you have burnout, you've likely, definitely, I would say, been overriding. So that's how that works. Remember, we started doing this out of survival, right? To be accepted, because our authentic voice was a threat, because our emotions and our truth got us in trouble, because producing, high functioning, excelling at extreme workouts got us rewards and praise. They kept us safe in our relationship and in society. Society viewed us as, we got accolades and all of these things. We got rewarded. And so we had to keep this charade up, even though it may not have been really authentic. And again, this is automatic. This is an automatic subconscious behavior that we're doing. It takes time to get to that authenticity piece, for that little whisper of that little voice inside of you to really make herself known. And maybe even these things didn't get us reward and praise. Maybe they just got us acknowledged, right? They just got us acknowledged. And that was enough to keep food in our bellies, to keep a roof over our head. Like, that's how our psyche perceives it, right? To keep us safe in the relationship. Mom and dad are acknowledging me if I get straight A's. So I'm going to keep getting straight A's because I need to be seen in this way, or in any way, right? Some of us, a lot of us, can override just in our day, okay? Or we can override as a big general theme for years and years and years. And those will show up differently. Adrenal fatigue shows up if we're overriding in our day and we're producing, each day is just too much. Shows up in sleep, shows up in that crash on the couch, right? But then there can be an overall overriding just in general over years and years and years, and that will show up differently. That could take 10 years to show up. Who knows? Is that these show up eventually in burnout is the same. So a person can be overriding for years and then reach 45 and all of a sudden they have lupus, or they have an autoimmune condition, or chronic fatigue syndrome sets in, right? Another person can be overriding in their day and it shows up each day with that nap that they need, right? Again, it just depends on the individual. My question to you is, how does overriding show up for you? Like, what are the ways in which you are overriding? Are you overriding as a big general theme throughout your life and you can keep this charade up for a while, but you feel like, oh, eventually it's going to catch up to me? Is it showing up just every day with that freeze, with that crash on the couch, with that just adrenal burnout, with that waking up in the middle of the night or not being able to fall asleep? Is it showing up like that? And then how is it showing up? For me, I realized, a lot of my fatigue and my symptoms were around this attachment piece. So I was noticing in conversations and in my relationships how much I was overriding, how much I was really stressed on whether or not I was going to maintain this sense of safety in my relationships, and what I was doing, the extreme rumination and inability to sleep and anxiety that I had around these pieces. And, for me, it was like, healing a lot of that attachment, that early stuff, that abandonment wound, that rejection wound was a big part of me eventually hearing that inner voice and then not overriding myself in relationships. So, how is it showing up for you? What are the things that you feel like you need to heal to get to that authenticity piece that's in there, that's like maybe hiding herself or wants to be heard and seen but scared? Again, there can be attachment, there can be abandonment, there can just be fear, so much fear, right? This isn't about forcing ourselves to start using our voice when our body isn't ready yet. It sacrifices more of our energy to do that than to stay in a little bit of override while we heal, right? And so having really a lot of awareness around when I'm overriding, what are the ways in which this shows up in my life, and what are the pieces that I can work with now that feel okay for me, and really taking these small little steps to shift, Or maybe it's like, hey, I'm not going to change anything right now. I'm just going to kind of start journaling about this. I'm going to start writing this down, making a note. It's interesting. I left this conversation. I didn't say what I felt. I'm going to just mark this down. That's interesting. And then maybe later you feel like really tired or kind of dissociative or just kind of fuzzy, and you have a lack of energy. Oh, isn't that interesting? This happened, and now this is happening. And just kind of tracking, that can be a great step that feels within an authentic capacity or range for your system to work with these pieces right now. So my intention for you is to grow more awareness and start working with these pieces in little bits. For some of you, it might be in big pieces, like, man, I've been wanting to do this big thing for a long time. I'm going for it. And that might be authentic for you. Growing authenticity, stopping the override, and that's it. If you have questions or comments or want to share with me the ways in which you've been overriding, leave it in the comments below. Bye.